Is lying always wrong? Have you ever questioned if always telling the truth is morally ideal? In numerous situations, complete transparency could lead to negative outcomes for everyone involved. Therefore, wouldn't lying be a moral obligation in those instances to prevent such disastrous results? These questions form the core of the debate between moral absolutists and moral relativists. To lie or not to lie? Whether lying is acceptable is a point of debate among different ethical theories. For Kantian philosophers, the answer is a resolute no. Ethical egoists, however, would argue for lying when it serves personal gain. Utilitarian proponents would suggest lying if it leads to greater happiness and less suffering for the majority. These examples illustrate how each ethical school establishes its own unique principles for moral judgment. Despite the many ways to define moral action, ethical thought can generally be grouped into two primary categories: moral absolutism and moral relativism. Moral absolutism suggests that morality stems from universal principles applicable across all situations. Conversely, moral relativism views morality from a situational standpoint, taking into account contextual differences and nuances. Moral absolutism can be visualized as a black and white checkerboard, where actions are distinctly categorized as right or wrong. On the other hand, moral relativism is like a watercolor painting with numerous shades of gray, illustrating a broad range of moral interpretation. Why is lying always wrong to moral absolutists? Moral absolutists believe lying is always wrong. This is because their moral judgments stem from universal principles, not individual situations. They consider lying an inherently wrong action. The specific details of each instance of lying do not change this fundamental judgment. Immanuel Kant's moral philosophy serves as a prime example of moral absolutism. Kant strongly criticized moral relativism, accusing it of obliterating the difference between virtue and vice. He argued that a moral law must be an apodictic practical rule of unconditional practical necessity. This means its applicability isn't dependent on any hypothetical factors. Kant's Copernican revolution in morality established a method for deriving universal, a priori moral laws. In his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, summarizes it as follows: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Kant's formula, the categorical imperative, prohibits actions that create a contradiction when they are made universal. Consider the act of lying. For instance, imagine you are late for work due to oversleeping. Instead of admitting this, you offer your boss a different excuse, like heavy traffic. Following Kant's formula, let's explore what happens if lying were a universal law. Imagine a world where dishonesty reigns. In such a world, trust would vanish as no one could believe another's words. Consequently, lying would lose its power because it thrives on the deception of someone's faith in your honesty. Following our example, lying to your boss would be pointless. He wouldn't expect you to tell the truth in the first place. According to the categorical imperative, lying is a self-defeating and contradictory act. Therefore, it is universally impermissible. Why can lying be permissible to moral relativists? Moral relativists may find lying permissible. This is because their moral judgment hinges on the situation surrounding an action, not the action itself. For them, no action is inherently right or wrong. Instead, its morality depends on the specific circumstances. Utilitarianism stands as a well-known example of moral relativism. This ethical framework, developed by philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, stems from consequentialism. Consequentialism, as its name implies, judges actions by their outcomes. Within the utilitarian tradition, the standard for evaluating these consequences is hedonistic. As Jeremy Bentham explains in The Principles of Morals and Legislation, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. In utilitarianism, whether an action is ethically permissible depends on the amount of harm or benefit it produces for everyone involved. Therefore, lying can be considered praiseworthy in specific situations. For example, consider the common scenario of lying about your true opinion of someone's appearance. If you think they look terrible but compliment them instead, this white lie might be morally acceptable from a utilitarian perspective. It reduces the pain of social embarrassment and creates the pleasure of validation. Utilitarianism appears simple and straightforward when compared to Kant's categorical imperative. However, applying utilitarian ethics to complex situations often creates perplexing moral dilemmas. One good example of this is the famous trolley problem. So, having considered both ethical approaches, what would your verdict be on the permissibility of lying?